mission here is simple: to explore how the innovations of Web3 can deliver on its potential to build a sustainable, more equitable world. Join us today as we learn how to navigate through Web 3.0 to build a better world.
Welcome to Better Worlds for our Carbonomics series. We are delighted to have Nihar Neelakanti with us today to share about his current work with a carbon removal startup called Eco-Sapiens, designed to build a better world. So welcome, Nihar.
Thanks, Julian, for having us.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you and learn more about Eco-Sapiens and what you're building. But first, I want to congratulate you. I know you just earlier this year received pre-seed funding and are currently developing a strategy of how to really build out this company. So you want to give us maybe a bit of an intro to what happened since you secured funding?
Yeah, thanks for that. So it's definitely been a fun ride. I will say that we raised the money earlier this year for Eco-Sapiens, and we're building the world's first carbon-backed NFT that makes it one click easy for anyone to have an impact on the planet and a way to show for it. This company was really while we raised our funding earlier this year in May of 2022, that's when we announced it. This company has been sort of the work of my climate thesis for the last 2 years or so, and more formally started building this with my co-founder Garrett Kane, over 18 months ago now, so a year and a half. Since we announced, the financing in May of this year, which was the best time to announce a crypto company, by the way, the day Luna crashes. Not great advice for other people that are in the crypto space, by the way. But, we announced in mid-May at a time when, crypto and just the markets in general were, fairly confusing, right? So at the time, the price of ETH was, well over $2,500 and now current moment, it's less than $1,300. And we've been hard at work building our core product, which is the carbon-backed NFT, bringing carbon on chain and then, turning it into the perfect kind of digital piece of art. So since then, we have done sort of three things. One is we've actually built the carbon to NFT bridge, which is, a core piece of IP, bringing on carbon on chain onto NFTs. Secondly, we have built out the entire, at least the prologue of the Eco-Sapien creative universe. And it's, sort of the genius work of my co-founder, Garrett Kane, who's been building the science fiction behind, this whole storyline. And then the third thing is, since announcing, we have slowly chipped away at building now, what is the #1 climate NFT community in Web3, which has been pretty awesome to do so. And I think doing that in a market that steered, speculation away, frankly, brought us really cool, mission-aligned community members. And it's a niche today, mind you, but we've somehow figured out a way to build something special for people that are looking to connect with other climate-minded folks.
Yeah, that's very exciting what you're saying there. It is a niche today, but it is a niche that's very likely going to expand quite a bit. And I think one of the kind of missing links is just the incentives for individuals or quotation marks here, personal carbon removal. Can you expand on that a little bit? What those incentives could turn into and how that makes it a lot more exciting for people to participate?
Yeah. So if we look at the big picture in humanity's fight against climate change, as a society, we basically decided that carbon emissions are sort of the one metric that governments across the world are focusing on. Obviously, there's biodiversity loss, animal conservation. There are also lots of important things that we do need to be fighting for, but at a global level, right, we're saying carbon emissions is a thing that we need to beat. Now, today, when we look at the total amount of carbon emissions we emit, it's about 50 gigatons per year. And when you break that down, most studies show you, Julian, that most people break down that 50 gigaton per year carbon emissions by sector. So they'll say energy is the largest contributor, right, to carbon emissions, transportation, agriculture, construction, etc. But the way I looked at it was who's sort of responsible for those emissions. Is it companies? Is it consumers? Or is it government, right? Or is it something else? And when you look at it like that, what you do find is that consumer or personal carbon footprint is going to be it's actually the biggest bucket of carbon emissions, right? So you do drive to work, or you take public transportation, or you heat your home using gas. We eat produce, agriculture, whatever, right? We eat meat. That's one of the leading causes of carbon emissions. And my whole thing was like, okay, if we can actually enable consumers, the everyday person, to lower their carbon footprint just by a little bit, not something crazy drastic that would require, a whole lifestyle change, but just a little bit, or if we can incentivize them to perhaps regenerate, certain resources on the planet, then as that bubbles up to this big 50 gigaton per year, sort of carbon footprint challenge, maybe we can actually move the needle there. And so that's sort of kind of the thesis for, getting consumers to sort of the opportunity, right? So in terms of how you incentives, the thesis I have is that I think people do at scale really care about impact, and they will, put their money and their time and their energy towards, doing greater good for the planet. But you have to make it, and this is my thesis, you have to make it one click easy. You have to make it financially attractive, or you have to make it cheaper, meaning like the lower carbon thing has to be cheaper. And it has to align with like your social utility. I would say that I steer more on like the altruist side just a little bit, but that's not where the TAM is in terms of people. I think most people, when I think about recycling, for example, and this is sort of like my pragmatic opinion, and you can, disagree with it, Julian, or anyone else. But when I think about recycling, most people do know that recycling doesn't actually work. Like there's a lot of things in the back end that make it pretty complex. But we do it every day, I think, for two reasons. One is it is, quote unquote, one click easy. Everyone has a recycle bin in their yard. There's a system in place where people come pick it up. And secondly, I think it's a big virtue signal. I think it's a way for you to tell, like, once you put something in there, it kind of eases your guilt, right? I've done something good. Or you tell your kids, like, hey, to your son or daughter, like, hey, put the plastics and papers in that bin, or, versus the trash in that bin.
We're doing the right thing.
We're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Whether that happens is a different story, right?
Totally.
But you as a consumer, you need to feel like you're having that impact.
You have that experience, at least on a superficial level, as a consumer, totally. And I think there's a very interesting, kind of learning curve for all of us right there. And what you explained is we have to move on from virtue signals and like quotation marks, the right thing, into much more holistically connected chains of consequences, right? As you said, recycling. Let's not take it apart in this episode, but if you've ever been to a landfill, you'll know what Nihar and I are kind of pointing at here. I'm curious though, because you guys are focused on nature-based carbon removal credits from reforestation, from kelp and soil sequestration. So I'd love to hear quite a bit more about these specific projects and how you select them, because you said it there earlier that, actually it's not just carbon, it's the entirety of the holistic kind of activity, the way we interact with the ecosystems. And so it sounds and looks like to me that you're kind of weaving that in as you're focusing on carbon.
So carbon markets are obviously, it's a very complex sort of market, and it was founded, I believe, in 1997 at the Kyoto Protocols as a way to, incentivize carbon reduction, either voluntarily or from regulatory. And it's basically by putting a price on the negative externality of carbon, right? That's kind of the crux of it. There are carbon credits that are issued for activities that are in the business of carbon sequestration, right? So direct air carbon capture, that's kind of the cool, sci-fi engineering based way of capturing carbon, right? Through these big fans that, it's crazy. And then you have
it needs you, and it's crazy. Yeah,
it's crazy. And yeah. I just heard earlier this week that Wyoming is now installing the world's largest direct air carbon capture fans in that state. I'll tell you the simple, so there's engineering based carbon removal methods, and I think that look, this is a small rabbit hole, I guess, but I do see a future where I kid you not, I see everyone will have like a direct air carbon capture fan on top of their house, or, across all buildings across the world. I actually see a future where, we could see that. Obviously the technology has to get really efficient, but look, we already have like gas heaters and fans and things on houses everywhere already. It's not that hard for me to believe that you could have direct air carbon capture everywhere. But that's a side note. So there's engineering based methods, and then there's nature based methods. And nature-based methods have actually always been tried and true, right? So regrow trees or help prevent the deforestation of the trees that we do have. It is expand seagrass in the ocean, which is where 70% of carbon emissions end up in the ocean, right? Seagrass, kelp is the fastest growing method of nature-based carbon sequestration, but kelp doesn't grow everywhere. There's certain regions in which it grows. Same with trees. You can't plant trees in a desert. You can't do that. And then there's soil, right? So the vast majority of land on planet Earth that's been managed, quote unquote, is for agriculture. And there's also, because we're already in that, in the business of agriculture, there are ways of incentivizing farmers to, sequester more carbon within the soil. So those are kind of the three. It's either ocean-based, land-based, sequestration methods, right, that are tried and true. I like those because in today's day and time, they're a lot easier to measure in a way that wasn't possible even 10 years ago, right? So there's, with drones and LiDAR and AI, with, like 24/7 satellite imagery, we're actually able to very easily articulately measure the sequestration potential of these natural, resources. So that's one reason why I like them. Secondly, it's just because they're cheaper. So if you look at sequestration for 1 ton of carbon capture from direct air carbon, from the engineering-based methods, they're well over, $600, $700 a ton. But nature-based carbon removal types are anywhere between the $10 to $50 range, depending on the type and the project. And so it's also just a matter of economics. When I think about what can consumers afford, it's okay, so I emit 13 tons of carbon a year as an American. What does 13 tons of carbon sequestered cost, right, through reforestation methods? Well, that's going to be about a few $100s. And when you look at it that way, it's like, okay, it's not that bad. Obviously, we hope to make it cheaper, but that is, it's an economic sort of view in my point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that explanation. And I just want to loop back to what you said, like that science fiction vision of like direct air capture, direct carbon capture, like large kind of facilities. I just want to ask that question back to you because you kind of said it. There's like a part of it that feels crazy. Not so much the part that maybe, it's included in a personal home, just like a solar panel might be, or, different heater or cooler systems might be. But the question to me often is like, what is the world we really want to live in, right? And so when we understand the ecosystem and the natural sequestration through land and water-based processes that planet Earth has been doing without us for a long time, it seems like, maybe we can connect with that in kind of the tradition of right relationship rather than just having all these sci-fi dreams about this technologically advanced planet Earth. What's your personal take on that? I mean, you kind of said it, but I just wanted to double tap on it.
I've got two, takes on this. One is that I think when we do look at the math and look at how much carbon has been emitted since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, even if every piece of machinery, every piece of equipment, the way we live our life, we figure out ways to make them all zero emissions, we still have to be in the business of capturing carbon out of the air if we want to avoid, the climate crisis that we're already starting to experience. It's actually math. There's some processes that, like air flight today, people have yet to figure out how to make that zero emissions, right? And we're going to keep flying on flights. That's the reality of it. So that's like one thing. I think it is like, irrespective of our relationship with the planet, we actually have to be in the business of capturing carbon out of the air, even accounting for all these things. The second thing is, I think there's 3 modes of like the way our economics works with our planet. You basically have you have an extractive relationship with the environment, you have a sustainable relationship with the environment, or you have a regenerative relationship with the planet, right? And extractive is, industrial revolution, land, labor, capital. In order to advance our economy, we have to extract resources from the planet. We utilize them to create value. We make money from them, and then the cycle keeps on going. The problem there is that you're in this perpetual cycle of growth at the cost of exploitation, right? And that's basically what it's been like for the last, since for the last 300 years specifically. Then you have sustainable, which is take what you need and give back what you don't, right? And in that sense, it's very much like one for one. So we, use a tree to heat our home or heat our home. We don't burn trees to heat our homes anymore, but to build a house, right? well, we should be in the business of
Depending where you
replanting
live, you
things.
might also use it for your stove, but yeah,
Depends.
not on
Depends.
the large industrial scale. Yeah.
No, and look, like people like their wood-fired pizza. It's right, but sustainable kind of relationship with the planet is where we take one and we give one, right? And then there's like regenerative, which is where there's economic models today, perhaps, and that's kind of happening with what we call regenerative finance, which is a whole crypto meets climate conversation on its own, but where we can actually use economics to incentivize the net new regeneration of the planet that far exceeds kind of our personal needs. And those are sort of the three modes, the three relationships I see, our economy and humanity can have with the planet.
Yeah, well said. And there's a succession in that because we come from a destructive past. We've talked about sustainability for a long time, but really that regenerative pathway might be the one that we more and more discover, right? I want to bring it back to Eco-Sapien and the NFTs though. So what I understand is that with each NFT mint, there'll be 20 metric tons of tokenized CO2 kind of backed, equivalent to like, more or less what you said, like the average American's annual carbon output is. Can you explain to us how that NFT price is set at the mint time and how that equation kind of pans out?
Yeah, so because each Eco-Sapien NFT is backed by carbon, we at Mint are trying to price it very close to the price of carbon. And this is basically an investment from you, right? So all we're doing when you buy an Eco-Sapien is, in a very clever way, we're directing your dollars towards this commodity that has like a fundamental value. So in that sense, unlike other NFTs on the market that are JPEGs or whatever, this is actually backed by an asset, right? So there's intrinsic value to that, and if you trade it, there's you can always sort of guarantee whatever that price is of carbon at that time. So that's kind of our pricing, view on the Eco-Sapien. It'll be about $400 to $500 US. We might charge a little bit of a premium on top of that for all the other things that we have to do, right? Like this to us was just a wedge to building a climate conscious community, and we have a very long roadmap ahead of us, but we are trying to match this very close to the price of carbon. And the important thing to know is that you're buying a commodity, right? So it's not I wouldn't necessarily view it as an expense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the NFT and the Eco-Sapien NFT part of it is really just the first step in your vision, as far as I understand. And you have a very unique approach to create that bigger vision, right? To attract consumers involving technology, finance, art, and like a dose of futurism there. And so, I'd love to hear how, maybe an example like the Eco Cart, if you could explain that to us, and then, how you see all of this potentially rolling out. Like we'd love to hear your future vision here for a little bit.
Yeah. So at a high level, we founded Eco-Sapiens to create a platform that made climate action possible for anyone. That's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to make climate action possible for anyone. And we can do that by picking apart, different segments of your life and making the impactful option one click easy, financially attractive, and culturally exciting, social utility. That's the thesis. The Eco Card is another kind of fundamental product that fits into that thesis in my view. So, people are already spending. Every day people are swiping their card, they're making transactions. It's an existing user behavior. We're not reinventing user behaviors here. What I think, however, is that we could create a very unique card that's sort of like an Amex. So I would want it to be elite. It has to be cool. That's part of the social utility piece, right? Maybe it's made out of bamboo. I don't know. Like it just has to have this like cool factor to it. But there's two features with this card that I think make it exciting. One is we can design the world's best sustainable loyalty and rewards program, where we're partnered up with every lower carbon product or good service, sustainable minded company out there, right? Whether it's Adidas and now they're like plastic free shoe line, or Patagonia or Allbirds, these other kind of mission aligned lower carbon goods and services, where every time you purchase there, maybe you're getting like a bigger discount than the average person, right? So for you as a user, it's just you're getting discounts at places that you like and that you feel that you're excited to buy from. On the back end, as a byproduct, it's like, oh great, we're directing your dollars towards a lower carbon lifestyle, right? But you don't even know it. For you, it's just you're saving money. That's one piece of this. The other piece of this is, instead of giving you these blank points back, which people typically get with credit cards, we can give you points back in carbon. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the unique thing here is like every time you're swiping, maybe you're getting points back in carbon, which then you can go use once again to go shop at these same places, for example. The cool thing about getting money back in carbon is that by getting money back in carbon, you're actually regenerating the planet, right? So it's almost like a few of your dollars are going back to financing reforestation, but you're also just getting the commodity. So it's both doing good for the world and you're gaining some value from it. That's what I think about, this eco card. It's really just like, in my view, a very elite, Amex for sustainability, and it fits the thesis, right? So you're already shopping. Let's make it one click easy. You will save money and through the sustainable rewards loyalty program. You're also going to make money through carbon, and it's very cool, right?
Yeah,
that's the thesis.
I love it, and I'm happy to hear a bit more of that bigger vision you have. But I think what you're bringing into this conversation here is so important. Like, big picture, I think many people tune into this topic know that we are in a time of humanity's evolution where we are getting in touch with the carbon cycle of the planet and with our destructive path behind us. And as we're creating the pathway forward, it's like, as you said, there's the natural way that, has happened without us, but since we're here, we need to interact with it. And then there's also the simple way of how our current economy is rolling. So people swipe their credit card and buy stuff all over the place. That will likely not change overnight. So how do we connect to that place? So I totally see that vision of an eco card. You're right; it should probably be bamboo for like state of the art coolness. But it's kind of maybe the unfortunate truth about where we're at in our story as humanity is we're here in this conundrum, and I don't know if industrial capitalism is the entire path forward for all of our time on the planet, but we have to find a way out of it right now. And as you said, where climate meets crypto, there's a lot of potential for that, right?
There's a lot of exciting things there. I mean, I recently published a big deep dive into crypto meets climate. It's called Regenerative Finance, ReFi, and I'm astounded. I mean, more than astounded. I'm like very grateful for the hundreds of founders out there that have taken the leap to start building in this space, and it's new. I remember when I started looking at it over a year ago, there were less than 50 companies. Today, there's 150. I would imagine that there are 300 this time next year. ReFi is just the perfect alignment of like profit and purpose, and I think that's something that a lot of people want to have. Just kind of how we're just talking about it, Julian. It's you don't want to sacrifice your lifestyle, but if you can do good while enjoying the same lifestyle, then I think you're going to get a lot of people to do it. And that's sort of the promise of, regenerative finance and crypto meets climate.
Yeah. And, maybe there are certain things we need to sacrifice in our lifestyle, like buying random plastic shit. But, that's for another conversation. I'm also curious about, just the general Web3 and tokenized environment and, certain issues that show up across the board, right? Transparency would be one of them. Proof of impact would be another one. Auditability would be one of them. Perhaps you could explain on this issue and how Eco-Sapiens will address, especially the auditable issue.
So this is, the problem with the carbon markets in general is oftentimes people don't know where the carbon comes from, how it's managed, and specifically how it's managed over a period of time, because that matters, right? And how many people own it, because there's a big duplicity issue, which you just kind of mentioned. When you can take carbon, if you can source carbon at the source, so with the project developers themselves. So, if you and I become project developers in Vancouver, right? We buy a piece of land, we reforest it, we work through some agencies, we get some carbon credits. At that point of contact with the project, if you can then take those credits and if you can tokenize them, then because these are permanently etched onto the blockchain, it's virtually impossible to make copies of them, right? And if you do make copies of them, people will know because they're all publicly available, written on the blockchain. So that's actually like the big opportunity here, right? Is if you're either an individual or if you're a company like Microsoft that's buying carbon credits, if you're buying them that are in a tokenized state, you can pretty much be guaranteed that there isn't some duplicity. That Microsoft and Stripe don't own the same carbon credit, for example, which is a problem in the traditional markets. We are doing something very similar, right? So we're working very closely with brokerages directly, ensuring that we're receiving carbon credits that have not been, duplicated, and we're putting them on the blockchain with the NFT. And so whenever you, as an owner, get an Eco-Sapien NFT, you're the new owner of that carbon. And if you trade it or you sell it to somebody else, that person will now be the new owner of it. There's not going to be two copies of the same carbon credits. They're perpetually attached to that specific NFT. Now, however, I don't think I think we want to get people to buy more carbon over time, actually. That's kind of what we're excited by. And so with the Eco-Sapien NFT, when you mint it, it does come with 20 tons, but now we're also turning into a collectible, which is, increasing the business of fun, obviously. But you can continue to upgrade your Eco-Sapien and make it more beautiful, more rare, or you can buy a whole different character if you want to, by the way. There's a whole different set of species. But you can upgrade your character by sequestering more carbon. So we could basically say if you want, the hair growths, right? Or like the plants to grow from behind the back, you'd have to, upgrade by buying more carbon through our platform, which you can do. And that just, visually is represented by making your character more beautiful. So in this way, we actually think we want you to buy the NFT and then sequester more carbon over the course of time with that same NFT. And all that carbon is just getting attached, onto your same sort of vehicle.
Gotcha. Well, it is getting, I guess, step by step more transparent and step by step more simple, but for a lot of people it is still a quite complex field. And so I want to kind of parallel to another field that I know you worked in before, which I remember doing research for this episode, and you worked in capital management in your past, including with Menlo Ventures ESG program. And so would you say that in the last 5 years the corporate community has actually accepted a lot of these ESG initiatives, or do you think it's kind of still the same as 5 years ago?
Yeah, it's funny. So yeah, I worked in the venture capital business for the last 7 years, up until starting this company. And I do remember that ESG for financial institutions back in the day, this is unfortunate, but this is, even 5 years ago, when you said ESG, investors and companies would say, oh, wait, so you don't want to make money.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing? That was 5 years ago, right? Like people would hear ESG and they would think, okay, you don't want to be in the business of succeeding. You don't want to be in the business of investing in great companies or great products. But today the script is totally flipped. So I think there's sort of two big drivers. I think the big one really is government. The Biden administration in the US has a big, push to bring, carbon accounting to the forefront of every business. That includes financial institutions. That's one thing. And then the second one is now there's like a revenue premium for being green, and dollars are actually being allocated towards it. Consumers are spending more, people are spending more money to be with companies that are green. Funny enough, like one of the big reasons why people, or even software companies, internet-based companies have been switching to Microsoft Azure as their cloud services is because Microsoft Azure is 100% renewable. Amazon AWS is not 100% renewable today. And so if you're a company that wants to immediately, internet-based company, right, that wants to immediately lower their carbon footprint, they're switching from AWS to Azure. It's not happening in droves, but it's an option, right? And so I bring that up because today in the capital management industry, people are basically putting their money where their mouth is. They are trying to find ways for themselves to be green. They're trying to introduce carbon accounting to their own, company sort of footprint. And then the third is they're actually investing in climate tech. That's actually the big thing. If you look at trends of climate tech investing and dollars spent towards new innovation there, it's basically been on this nonstop hike in the last 5 years. And this is despite, 2022 has been generally a slowdown in terms of investment across all categories, but it has not been in climate tech. It's been a persistent area that people are increasing their investment in. And it's just good business now. That's kind of the thing. It's just good business.
Right on. So the script flipped from that means you don't want to make any money to suddenly we're realizing it is actually good business. I'm glad to hear that actually. And this is the curve that I've been tracking myself with many interviews and podcasts in the last years is it's more than a trend now, right? To find one's alignment with the environment, but also, it's part of what can drive business forward. Nihar, I have one last question for you. Oh, go ahead if you have something to throw in there.
No, I was just going to say there's one of my theses that I published, and I wasn't the originator of this name. I saw it in a gym that I go to, but the title was Green is the New Black, right? And I think that's just very, very true today. I think that's how I describe climate tech to everyone. Everyone wants to do good, but today now there's business incentive, right? So green really is the new black. That's all I want to say.
Well, so for our last question, I'd love to hear what your advice would be to give to young people in our audience about the future opportunities in Web3, NFTs, and the environmental sphere.
I think, this there's this intersection, in Web3 that is called regenerative finance, which we've, spoken about a few times already. It's young. When you think about the size of DeFi and the money there, it's, multiples higher than regenerative finance. But I think that there are, it's the unique place where you can put your energy and your insight to do good for the world and, have a paycheck. And I think that means a lot, actually, especially for young people that, want to chase the dream and do good, but oftentimes it comes at the expense of, your lifestyle. And this is an area that says, no, you can have both. Study up on regenerative finance, drop into Discords, drop into Twitters. It's still, crypto's still an industry that isn't necessarily the most publicly accessible. You do have to start digging and following people on Twitter, and start crawling Discords and, joining these spaces, for example, going to these conferences and meeting people. But the Web3 community is very open. People love to make new friends, despite it being this like remote kind of, space. People love to meet in person and they love to hop on phone calls. So I would say dig into ReFi, jump into those spaces, jump into Twitter, go talk to different project leads, community managers, get involved. And that's a way to, get your foot in the door at some of these amazing, I think soon to be very iconic companies in the world.
Right on. Thank you so much, Nihar, for your time, for your work in the world, and for being here with us on this episode today.
Thanks for having me, Julian.